Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host, Ren. Today we continue with the Belmont Saga, Part 2, Chapter 2, The Tenets of Revenge. And this is a really short chapter, so we'll probably read Part 3, which is known as A Love Potion. Last week we concluded Part 1 as Paymaster Stenstrom and his intrepid crew of 2 scrap their plans to deliver brandy to Baz and instead embark on a search for Captain Gwendolyn and her Demophalon John scouting ship. It's a daunting task as they have no idea where she might be. They start discussing these creatures that the juries keep mentioning, the Cronins, and how the Cronins can make you hear and see anything they want. So obviously they're somewhere in the vicinity, and Tara had detected via the lantern's beam a large planet-sized body, or a small planet, that just appeared out of nowhere. And they hypothesized that that body that they briefly glimpsed through the lantern is wherever the Cronins are holed up, and they're trying to make their way to that location now to effect a rescue of the Demophalon John. They start tinkering with the robotic parts of innocent jury, and they believe since the juries seem to be in some sort of association or cahoots with the Cronins, as they mentioned briefly that they give food to the Cronins, they bring them prey, that they're somehow able to detect the Cronins with their robotic parts. So they're tinkering around. It's sort of like Radio Shack, just pulling parts off of innocent jury, his antennas, his head screen, and so forth, and see if they can find this crazy hidden Cronin world. And then we move into Part 2, where we discuss the woman in gray from her perspective. What happened on the ballroom at St. Gala's Vale, how Lord Stenstrom the Older was stolen by Lady Jubilee, and how that affected her. It affected her profoundly. At first she was just angry and heartsick, wanted revenge, declared Weirgild, wants to kill Lady Jubilee, but that's a tall order. Lady Jubilee is a trained Tyrolese sorceress, while Lady Vendra has no particular training or sets of skills. And they actually were going to face off in a bell tower at St. Gala's Vale, and it didn't go well for Lady Vendra. Lady Jubilee humiliated her, basically, and mentioned, how pathetic. You're pathetic. She went home with her tail between her legs. And then she received an apologetic letter from Lord Stenstrom the Older. He said he was sorry. He didn't mean for that to happen at the ballroom floor. And it's not her fault that happened. And it's just how things worked out. And he apologized. But she realized, she couldn't be angry at him. She still loved him deeply. Even though she just met him, she just had her heart set on him. And as Aram said earlier, the Cones, once they give their heart, they don't take it back easily. She puts on an ugly gray dress and then throws herself out the window. And then the Hospitallers come and they mend her wounds. The fall from the window didn't kill her. They declare her insane. They sent her off to a convent on the mysterious dark world of Kana 7 for her to live out her days, or maybe affect some sort of recovery. Mental illness in the League is not a highly looked upon thing. It's incredibly rare, and when it happens, it's a bad stain on your household. So they were going to send her off where she could recover or be tended in a discreet setting. But the dames of Kana 7 have other plans. As soon as they leave, they all convene in her room and start talking about sinister things. Like, yeah, your family did you a favor bringing you here. You're not mad. You're just whipped. We're gonna beat that whipness out of you. We're gonna train you, and we're gonna teach you the ways of gynology, which is a science we invented here on Carina 7. We're going to teach you how to maim, kill, and enslave men. And then we're going to set you loose on Kana so you can create mayhem, which is what they do a lot. They train these various wayward women in the ways of gynology and cut them loose just to see what happens, see what sort of splash they can make, see what sort of change they can affect. So we continue with Lady Vendra's training, part 2, chapter 2, the Tenets of Revenge. And that's another thing that they teach on Carina, is how to get revenge on a fool. So let's proceed immediately. It's only a few pages long, and then we will continue to chapter 3, a love potion. The last thing she learned was possibly the most important. She learned how to hate and how to wage revenge. In the stone classrooms of Carina, she learned the 6 Carinan tenets of revenge. 1. A master revenge is decades in the making. 2. Revenge should strike at the heart many times, and at the flesh only once. 3. Failure to act when the time is ripe is the poison one drinks. 4. Patience is the key attribute in conducting revenge. 5. Uncertainty is revenge's deadliest weapon. And 6. There are no innocent bystanders in revenge. Revenge on Carina was an all-or-nothing proposition, utterly vicious and invariably fatal, one way or the other. Armed with this new education, Lady Vendra's family was summoned. They were told that, under their care, she was restored to sanity. Elated, the House of Cone came for Lady Vendra, and the woman in gray went home. She took her time as she settled back into her manor. Her family, overjoyed she was well, and returned to them, seemingly recovered. Externally, she appeared fine, and she said all the things they expected her to say. Her father bought her a whole wardrobe full of new cone gowns of vibrant colors. How she used to love them! Little did her family suspect that she never wore any of those lovely gowns. She never wore anything but gray again, and a pair of button-up boots in the Carina style. However, to her family's eyes, to her friends' eyes, they saw her wearing cone gowns. Her skills with deception and disguise, learned during her dark days on Carina, were near perfect. At a leisurely pace, she put her plans for revenge against Lady Jubilee into motion. She followed the tenets. She took her time. She resumed her place in Bremnath society. She attended social functions and drank tea with her circle of bitches, returned to them whole and much wiser. Under her steady but imperceptible influence, the Ballwigs, once a cheerful gathering of ladies, hoping to win the hearts of Stellar Fleet officers, became a dreadful and notorious group, rejoicing in gossip and lies, and above all else, hoping to inflict misery and pain upon any foolish enough to fall for their tricks. She began her work. She told her friends that she had been on sabbatical on Carina 7. She spoke about how harrowing the trip there and back had been, how space travel was not nearly as safe as the public had been told. She knew Lord Stenstrom of Belmont was in the fleet and was soon to be made captain of a ship. She also knew that the lurid stories she told of mutiny, mishaps, sodomy, botulism, and other perils of space travel would take wing and travel all the way to Esther, to the eventual ears of Lady Jubilee. Uncertainty was indeed a powerful tool. Lady Jubilee, fearless for herself, was no doubt hand-wringing in fear for her handsome husband doing such a dangerous job. The seeds were planted. Vile fruit was soon to grow. Next, she needed a network of slaves to do her bidding without question. She went to Calvert, a place no one would expect a fine lady of Cone to go, and stayed in an exclusive room at the Empire Hotel. She wore the odd clothes and spoke in the hidden tongues reserved for the wealthy, and watched the people below come and go, as was the fad for the elite, to watch Calvert from high above like a great anthill on full display. When she was ready, she ventured out. There, in the dark, twisting streets, she preyed upon the dirty urchins and filthy men that were there in quantity. Pretending to be an innocent, bewildered woman, she had no trouble luring the men in, ending up flat on her back in the seedy rooms and crooked inns near the docks, playing service to drunken, stinking men who, with every thrust, made themselves more her slave. For waiting deep within her womb was the barb, doing its job with terrible effectiveness. Sometimes she didn't enslave them. Sometimes, behind closed doors and stark naked, she fought and killed them just for the fun of it. Their screams and dying pleas like sweet music, soothing her. There were no shortage of victims in Calvert, and no shortage of suspects to take the blame for the killings that had cropped up in earnest. She carried with her chemicals from Kana that removed all trace of her passing, leaving no material for evidencers to find. Eventually, as years passed by, she developed a thirst to kill more and more men. Sometimes she would go out to Calvert not to collect slaves, but simply to kill. The Fiend of Calvert, as the mysterious killer was soon to be called, was loosed upon the region. She loved seeing articles about him in the posts, and the pictures of the Fiend as a man in a gas mask made her laugh. None, suspecting a skinny woman in gray, was responsible for it all. From her room at the Empire, she collected slaves and made dead bodies, snickering into her tea and acting shocked as she sat in the hotel dining room and lobby, watching the evidencers and gifted inspectors sift through the non-existent genetic evidence and stare for the guilty, not knowing her Karina-trained mind was unpierceable and shut. Soon, she had a whole gallery of filthy men who would do anything she asked, and a pile of dead men that she had made, killed by her hand. There was an old underground vault near the ruins of Woodward where she kept her men within easy reach whenever she needed them, and they roamed the ruins alive, but in a daze, a hopeless trance. Far away in Calvert, the simple folk were burning with fear. From high above at the Empire Hotel, she gazed through the spyglass at the terrified people and laughed. One of the things she did was order one of her slaves, who had access to old Zaffin Mercy freighter, was to load it full of shadout and encounter the fleet vessel Amazing, where Lord Stenstrom served as the navigator. Encounter the Amazing and detonate the shadout, she told the man, and he did it without question, killing himself in the process. Returning to Bremnath and lying low, she listened to the winds of gossip. Her slow burn efforts were working. Lady Jubilee in distant Tyrol was said to be beside herself with fear, desperate for her husband to quit the fleet. Oh, splendid! Additionally, she learned that Lady Jubilee had told her husband that he would have no sons until he met her wishes. And Lady Jubilee was true to her word, punching out one daughter after another with regularity, every 2 or 3 years. The obvious thing to do was strike at her children. The frustrating thing was Lady Jubilee was a tight-fisted, controlling mother, and getting to her children was difficult. She sent her remaining Calvert men slaves out to scout the Belmont-South Tyrol manor and grounds. They reported the grounds were encompassing 5 square miles of old Marian land south of the city of Tyrol. There were no obvious technological protections about, yet something appeared to be protecting the grounds, for several men who got too close disappeared without trace and were not seen again. Her army of slaves was utterly disposable, and she continued sending them off on one-way missions. She succeeded in poisoning one daughter with tainted candy placed on the grounds, but nothing happened except that her hair turned blonde instead of the usual black or that odd silver color. These Belmonts were damnably tough. So, Lady Vendra sat back and waited. Something would present itself. She needed to be patient. Lady Jubilee was up to her 15th daughter. Over 40 years had passed, and even Vendra's remarkable patience was beginning to wear thin. She decided to change her tactics a bit and went after Lord Stenstrom directly. She had generally avoided attacking him, perhaps because she still loved him, for even the dark school mistresses of Kana couldn't beat that out of her. Her love for him was a tiny ember in the dark she labored to keep alive and warm. In any event, it was time to make something happen. She began making herself available at Fleet. Her brother, Derleth, was a newly minted admiral, and with his connections, she had the run of the place. She had dinner with Captain Stenstrom many times, her appearance disguised, yet another skill she'd learned on Kana. However, unlike the Calvert men, whom she easily had her way with, Captain Stenstrom showed no interest in her beyond what the demands of social civility called for. The other men at the table were near fainting with the amount of pheromones she was pouring out, but Captain Stenstrom didn't react. Apparently, he was protected by a natural addiction to his wife's scent. She sighed. She collected new slaves, but could never enslave the one man she truly wanted. So her attempts to get Lord Stenstrom failed. However, the effort was not a complete loss. At one of the dinners she attended, she overheard Captain Stenstrom talking to another captain about inheritances of all things. Apparently, the captain Lord Stenstrom was talking to was going through a nasty rite of succession with his 2 sons, as they both claimed to be the next lord of his house. It was quite the scandal. Lord Stenstrom admitted that he himself had no sons, and the captain he was talking to laughed. "Well, I thought I had problems," he piped. Lady Vendra listened, and the wheels turned. The House of Belmont-South Tyrol had no sons, no line of succession as spelled out in the rigid rules of Canaan society, and therefore that's how her revenge would proceed. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 2, The Tenets of Revenge. So we see the game plan of Karainen Revenge is patience. To send out feelers, create intrigues, wait for the proper moment, and strike only once. And if you fail to act when the time is ripe, when that all you've labored for comes into fruit, and it's there for the taking, you had better take it. If you hesitate, you have just sealed your own fate. So, we see Lady Vendra gleefully donning her Fiend of Calvert persona, not only just to kill, but to collect slaves, an army of men that could do anything she said. And she does this using that barb. She has sex with them and then takes them over. Though she tried to put the kibosh on Lord Stenstrom several times, incognito, in disguise, try to lure him in with pheromones and then get him. But he never never succumbed to her scent, which was damn frustrating. Let's continue on here. Part 2, Chapter 3, A Love Potion. So we see how Lady Vendra's methods of revenge proceed, and then we also will see the genesis of the Baz Circle curse. We see it start right here in this chapter, what started it, and how it grew from this one spot. So let's continue. Part 2, Chapter 3, A Love Potion. Lady Vendra sat in her Remnath manor and considered the situation. 15 daughters. Lady Jubilee had to be doing something to prevent the creation of a boy child. Lady Vendra knew from her Karina training that it was possible to pre-select the sex of one's child without using external methods such as the Hospitallers used. The Black Hats could do it with Shadow Tech. Karina adepts could do it with concentration, and there were any number of herbal methods that would work as well. That must be how Jubilee was doing it, via herbal methods. Vendra began a fresh attack. She circulated information that the House of Belmont-South Tyrol could not have any males, that Lord Stenstrom was not virile in that manner. As with everything, the attack took time to put into place and grow. The years rolled by. Daughter after daughter were added to the Belmont household, and Lady Vendra continued the pressure. She ventured into the Xenon region and frequented areas she knew the distant relatives of the Belmont-South Tyrol house would be, and she filled their ears full of tales of South Tyrol's soon-to-be lost house and all their wealthy holdings and lands to be redistributed to the lords of the city of Tyrol. She even added the tidbit that the lords of the city had already drawn up plans reapportioning the South Tyrol manor grounds. That really got the people talking. Weeks later, she began hearing how the cousins and distant relatives of the Belmont-South Tyrols were actually going there in person to present themselves and make their various cases for the favorable distributing of lands and properties after the passing of the Lord and Lady. The very real problem of succession began to tell on Lord Belmont, and Lady Vendra caught wind of him making his concerns known to Lady Jubilee. By this point, they had 29 daughters, and Lord Belmont knew they would be left with nothing should there be no male heir. Lady Vendra's revenge had been in progress for over 80 years, and her Will-Gild had been running for nearly 90. Now it was time to really apply the screws to the House of Belmont-South Tyrol. Revenge was at hand. Unfortunately, she ran square into a series of troubling setbacks. Her stockpile of slaves in the Woodward Vault was raided and decimated by a paid vigilant from the north, known as the Mad Lord of Walther. One man by himself got through all her defenses and killed most of her Calvert men, rendering the stronghold useless. She tried returning to Calvert and snaring more men, but again, the Mad Lord presented himself, challenging her in direct combat. Piecing together information taken from the Woodward Vault, the Mad Lord had discovered the Fiend of Calvert connection and personally investigated her doings in the region. Showing remarkable skill, he tracked her down, rousted her out of her Calvert lair, killed many of her remaining slaves, and engaged her across the rooftops as she tried to flee from an adversary whom she, even with her Karinan-taught skills, was no match against. She had become jaded and careless, giving the Mad Lord no regard. However, she quickly found he was no ordinary man. He was strong beyond compare, impervious to harm, and seemingly immune to the female tricks she threw at him as they battled. With no recourse left, she was forced into full flight before the Mad Lord, running for her life over the rooftops of St. Edmunds. She was lucky to escape. Licking her wounds, she added the Mad Lord's name to the list of people to hate. Rightly fearing the Mad Lord and his continued investigations in Calvert, she decided to go off-world for a time, which, as it happened, served her needs nicely. Baz was a fine world to get lost in, as there she could bide her time and hide in plain sight, while Carina was most certainly a female-oriented world. Baz was a more male-dominated place. The men there were arrogant and sweaty. Their heroes were all men. The women of Baz were noisy and pugnacious, but clearly subservient. They even wore their hair in a certain way, those long strands of hair they called the Molochs, to announce their marital status to the grotesque men. She considered going on a murder spree, but thought better of it. As she sweated it out in the tawdry villages, she became aware of a virility potion the Bazars called the so-called God Sperm Tincture, a chemical extract that ensured the creation of a boy child, and not just any boy child, an exceptional boy child. Lord Sixtus of Grenville was said to be a product of the God Sperm Tincture. This tincture was some sort of Baz tradition, once again heralding the men over the women. Finding the heat and humidity intolerable, she allowed herself the luxury of renting an atmospheric to create her a pocket of dry, cool air. Settling in, she found a reputable pharmacy that sold the tincture in the city of Dyson-Clampton by the banks of the Dan River. Didn't take her long to enslave both her atmospheric, creating the pocket of cool air around her, and the pharmacist himself, the two of them making sweaty love on the balcony under the hot summer Baz sky as the atmospheric stood nearby. Her new slave told her that he had, in addition to the God Sperm Tincture, a foolproof love potion that worked on pheromones. He would simply take some of her scent, create the love potion, and any who drank it would be lost to her. He, however, advised against mixing the two. Random and unexpected things might happen. Excellent. This appeared to be working out better than she had hoped. Sitting at a cafe, basking in the cool air created by her atmospheric slave, she quickly penned an unsigned letter to Lord Belmont, informing him of the existence of the God Sperm Tincture and what it could do for his heirless household. She hoped to put a powerful seed into his head. And with that, we conclude Part 2, Chapter 3, A Love Potion. So, we see Lady Vendra runs into a series of setbacks. One, the Mad Lord of Walther, hired by Lord Gerald Catherbaum, as we met in the Aram chapters, was successful in routing her out. He discovered her cache of enslaved men and defeated them. He rousted her out of her lair in Calvert, and finding him much more extraordinary than just ordinary men. He's basically a superhero. He's got super strength and invulnerability and can do all. He's got the sister's freaky deaky power, for gosh sakes. She lost and she had to run. You hear that, Disney? A woman lost. How about that? Anyways, she decided to go off-world and lay low, goes to Baz, and starts hearing about this funky potion that is supposed to ensure the birth of an exceptional male child. And she had been putting seeds into the gossip winds from her stronghold in Jakarta, in Remnath, about the House of Belmont-South Tyrol, how they weren't going to have any male heirs. And without male heirs in the league, there's no succession. All your stuff is rendered public property, or basically anyone who can make a claim to it can come and get it. And that happens every so often. It happened with the House of Durst, as they had 7 girl childs and no men, and the House of Durst went extinct. But Captain Davidge, being a friend of the House of Durst, took all of their possessions and hid them away in a secure secret warehouse, so that if the Dursts ever reconstituted, he would return their stuff to them. He's a good friend, Captain Davidge. So all these hangers-on are showing up at Belmont, South Tyrol, and like, hey, I heard you can't have any men. Any thoughts on where your money and your stuff is going to go? I could use some of that. So you can imagine how that is starting to weigh on Lord Belmont. Lady Jubilee has said stubbornly, you get no men until you retire from the fleet, but he's not going to do it. So they're up to 29 daughters, no sons. It looks like basically sons aren't in the cards. So there's a lot of pressure on him. He doesn't want to see his daughters go penniless after his passing. That's just the way the laws of succession in the league work. So she sends him a letter talking about this potion that will guarantee the birth of a boy child, and a good one, an exceptional one, not some muckspine, but an exceptional kid. So that lures him to Baz. Now, we didn't, as I didn't remember it quite correctly, we don't see the origins of the Baz Circle Curse. We're going to see that next week in Chapter 4, the Ganatus Curse of all things. So that's where the curse begins. And you'll actually see it in real time. It's that chapter is a little bit much to add here. We'll do it next week. So I hope you're enjoying Lady Vendra's insights. We got kind of a primer on this stuff earlier. It talks about the succession, how Lord Belmont was becoming concerned for his household and his daughters, but Lady Jubilee's not going to budge. And then he got a letter from somewhere, he didn't know where, telling him, hey, go to Baz. They got this funky potion that will help you out. So, but it was Lady Vendra who wrote the letter, intentionally trying to get him to Baz. But when he gets there, she has no intention of him taking the Godsperm potion. She wants him to take the Baz love potion instead, scented with her pheromones, which, according to the pharmacist that she enslaved, will enthrall him to her. So, we will see what happens with that next week. Until then, this is Ren Presents. I am your host, Ren. Peace out.